Welcome to On Fighting in Thailand, the best news and analysis covering the economics and infrastructure of Muay Thai. I'm Matt Lucas, journalist, commentator, and ex-Muay Thai fighter. Make stronger fighters, make stronger people. So in this podcast, we talked to Caley Reece, real all-star in the world of female Muay Thai. She had 60 fights, a Lion Fight Belt Championship, did a lot for the sport, and is still doing a lot at Riddler's Gym over in Perth. So we talk a little bit about her time promoting, fighting out here in Thailand, and how the Muay Thai scene in Australia grew, especially for women. So it was a great interview, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, the interview with Caley Reece. So great to have you on the show today, Caley. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Just we're sort of at the end of summer now, so heading in towards our cooler months. But like I was saying to you before, this time last year, I was only just starting to get my movement back after knee surgery, so I'm looking forward to a bit of a different winter and being able to actually do something this winter, that's for sure.
Yeah, you've always been competitive, so it'll be exciting to see what you do with your new knee. But let's launch into a little bit of your career and sort of what was happening with Australian Muay Thai at the time. So you began as sort of an exercise program, or that's what you wanted to do, and then what happened? You saw Riddler's fight. How did things start off for you?
So I just initially went along to like a group kickboxing session with a friend of mine, and I broke my wrist on the first session because I did an uppercut roll. But from that session, I kind of knew that I really enjoyed what I'd done, and I really wanted to keep going after my cast had come off. And so once I got better from that, I started at a kickboxing gym, and it was sort of like kickboxing with Zenjukai karate. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's like a karate-based sport, and it was sort of tied in with kickboxing. And I did that for about maybe 5 or 6 years, and then I went to a Muay Thai show, which was Darren's retirement fight show, and there was some girls fighting on that show, and I'd seen like kickboxing fights, but I haven't seen many Muay Thai fights with like knees and elbows and everything like that. And I saw a particular girl fight, and I was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And so I spoke to one of my friends who was doing Muay Thai at the time, and he said, "Oh, you've got to go to Riddler's Gym." And on that Monday, so that was on the Saturday night, and then on that Monday, I called up Riddler's Gym, and I like obviously said that I was interested in coming down to train and everything like that. And that was like right back at the very beginning when Daz had only just started the gym in his garage in his house. So yeah, the rest is history, obviously.
Yeah, and so when, in terms of dates, that was in the early 2000s?
So that would have been about like 2005, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure it's about 2005, 2006.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like yesterday sometimes when I say 2005, I'm like, holy crap, that's like a long time ago.
And so what was the Australian Muay Thai scene like? You said you saw a few women fight. Were there a lot of women fighting at the time, or was it still early goings?
It was still really early goings at that time. The girl that I actually saw fight, her name was Tiana Cavalier, and she's actually a Perth girl as well, and she went on to have some really big fights and was really successful in her career too. So she was fighting a girl from New Zealand, and at that time there were female fighters around, but there weren't very many. So you'd get like a fight show and there'd be like 1 or 2 female fights on the fight show, whereas now, if you compare it to now, you know, you can get half a card that's female fighters and half a card that's male fighters, or you can get a female that headlines the fight show, whereas back then, that was almost unheard of, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So seeing her fight, and obviously me then starting to do Muay Thai, it really did progress quite quickly from the time that I started. Within sort of 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, the Muay Thai scene for females really developed quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think maybe a lot of the people that were fighting in that particular time, like the males that were fighting, were coming towards the end of their career and starting their own gym. You had like people like Darren Reece, Darren Kirovic, Blair Smith, people like that were sort of towards the end of their careers and starting the gyms, and obviously then starting to gain students and more females started to get involved in the sport. So I kind of think that's how it all got kicked off a little bit.
And what was your early career like?
My early career, it was a little bit hard to start with because I did have quite a lot of background in the kickboxing already. Like I trained for 5 or 6 years, whereas a lot of people, when they have their first fight, they train for like a year or 18 months and then they jump in the ring. But I had that background of already having like 5 to 6 years of training already, so it was a little bit harder for me at the start to get matches. For instance, on my third fight, I had to fight a Thai girl with 70 fights, so they had to bring someone from Thailand. Daz told me that the girl had only had 17 fights. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I found out after she had 70 fights. I was like, okay, 70 fights. You know, at the start, it was a little bit difficult. But then sort of when I got to, 8 or 9 fights and there was more girls to fight, and obviously they'd been fighting too, and we sort of all just meshed in and fought each other. Back then it was like everyone just fought everyone. It didn't really matter. Like I fought girls. I fought a particular girl 4 times within 6 months. And we just didn't care, we just fought whoever was there because we all just wanted to fight.
And what was that like, fighting that one girl multiple times?
It was quite hard actually, because we were so similar in our styles, and there was really nothing between us on the best of days. It could have gone to either of us on either night. So towards the end, like the third and fourth fight, it got a little bit more difficult because we both were so aware of our own skills and their skills as well. So it was like a little bit not tentative, but it was like, I know what you're going to throw, and she knew what I was going to throw. So it was like, okay, we're waiting for this thing to be thrown. So it got a little bit harder towards the end, but we still took it because that's just how things were back then. We didn't pick and choose our fighters. If we got matched, we just said yes straight away. Like, it was just, we didn't care about money. We didn't care about what rules it was. It was just, we're fighting this person. And that way, it was like, yeah, cool, done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, and usually how it happens with pioneers in the sport. So what was it like when the Thai woman flew over? What was the situation with that?
So basically, I was obviously wanting to fight, and there was no one around to fight at that stage. There was the girl that I was talking to about fighting Darren, but she was too experienced, and there was a couple of girls that had a bit too much experience, like sort of edging towards the sort of 15 fight mark. And so Darren had organised with Stefan Fox, who was the WMC coordinator, general secretary at the time, to fly a Thai over. And they told me that she'd only had 17 fights, but I didn't care because I knew that I was going to get a good fight, and I was more than happy to take the fight. Then afterwards, I found out that she had 17.
Yeah.
But, that kind of thing, I guess, doesn't really matter so much, because when you look at the Thais, they can have 70 fights, but they can really fight to the experience of someone that's only had like maybe 5 to 10 fights, because they've been fighting so regularly. Like, they might rack up 3 fights in 1 week, so they don't get a long time to work on their skills and everything like what we do. I guess Darren knew that, and just trusted that as well, and I just trusted him as a trainer.
And in your career, you fought about 60 times?
Yeah, I fought 60 times, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when did your career start? And it went until the about 2015, 2014, correct?
Yeah, I think I finished around 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's been about 6 years now.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 years, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty active through that whole time. Like, I was, I guess you would call it, like, I was a bit of an older fighter. I didn't start till I was, kicking off until I was about 25, 26. And to some people, obviously, that sounds young, but most people are well into their career at that point. So I sort of knew that if I wanted to have kids and everything like that down the track, but I wanted to have a good career, I sort of needed to, get moving and get as much as what I could in that time. I sort of gave myself, 10 years to get as much done as what I could in that time. And, I just took whatever was there. I fought whoever. I did have like a particular list of people that I knew I needed to fight to get to the next particular level. Like I sort of started at the state title level, and then I knew that I needed to fight particular girls to get to the Australian title level. And then for the international level, I needed to fight, these people from these countries to get me there. And so I did have a big plan in place, but at the same time, I just took each fight as they came as well. And I never said no. Like every time Dad said, "You're fighting this person," I never ever said no. I never turned down a fight.
Mm-hmm. And you also were involved in IFMA for a year or two, correct?
Yeah, I fought in a couple of IFMA tournaments, yeah.
What was that experience like, and when did that happen?
I fought in 3 IFMA tournaments. The first one I tore my calf in, like the second round. So I had to actually withdraw from going through to the next level. Mm-hmm. So that would have been the final. The second time that was the first time. The second time was in a Super 8 in China, which was for the Sport Accord Games, which was a really, really good experience. So we had to do a eliminator here for Oceania to find the best fighter in Oceania. So every sort of area of the world did an eliminator. They found the best fighter for that region, and then we all fought together in front of the Olympic Committee in China, and that was a Super 8. So I had 3 fights in, I think it was 6 days. My first fight was against Belarus, and she had about 60 fights. I was maybe on like 26 fights at that point. That advanced me through to the semi-final. I fought Morocco, and then I beat her, and then I fought with Valentina Shevchenko in the final for gold. And she obviously beat gold. Mm-hmm. But just, having that experience and fighting so close together and having to make weight every day and just fighting against girls that level when I was still relatively quite new was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I assume Valentina had like about 90 or more fights, and you were on 20-something, like you said?
So after the fight, I knew who Valentina was, but I didn't know too much of her. I just knew that she was like the IFMA champion for, since she was like a kid, I knew that she was really good, but I didn't really know too much about her fighting style. And I spoke to her and her coach afterwards, and we're actually still really good friends now, and she said that she had about 500 fights.
Oh.
So that was my 30th fight. I remember distinctly thinking, oh my God, I'm only 30 fights, and she's got 500 something fights, because she's fought every sort of discipline. She's fought boxing and Muay Thai, MMA, all those kind of different styles. So she's just racked up so many fights over the years. And she's still going.
Yeah, she's still very, very active. And when was that Sports Accord Super 8?
Probably about 2010 or 2011 or something.
Basically, you're, still a little early in your career, about halfway, though.
Yeah, I was about halfway through my career at that point.
And what was going on in Australia at the time? Like, how do you think you developed through fighting so regularly?
There became a time in Australia with a bunch of girls, and I'll just rattle off a few names. There was like Nicole Rowland, there was Heather O'Donnell, Sarah O'Connell, Tiana Cavalier, and we just all fought each other. We didn't care if it was a rematch. Some of them were on Super 4s. We got to fight each other a couple of times on those, and we just all racked up fights really quickly within, the space of maybe 2 or 3 years. One year I was 14 fights in 1 year. I racked up 14 fights in 1 year, just having a couple of Super 4s, having the Super 8 in China, and just really utilising my time as well. So in between those fights, I'd shoot off to Thailand, because it's only, it was only one-way trip back then. 6 hours on a flight. I'd go to my camp in Thailand, and they'd organise me a fight in between shows here in Australia, and I just keep as active as what I could.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your time in Thailand and what that was like. You went to Sinbi in Phuket, correct?
Yeah, I went to Sinbi. Yeah, and they were really good there. They were, at the time, they were known for having a lot of female fighters that they trained, and there was Teresa Wintermeyer from Sweden, Madeline Dow used to go there a lot. So they were really well known for, having a lot of female fighters go to their gym. stay there and then fight for their gym. So I don't know, I lost count the amount of times I've been to Sydney, but I probably would have been maybe 20 times in my whole tour. I probably had about 16 fights in Thailand. And, they were really good. They always looked after me, and I always knew that when I went to Thailand, they would train me well, they'd look after me, they sponsored me, so I didn't have to worry about training, paying for my training or anything. And then they always got me a fight at the end of the stint that I did there. So, that really helped my career as well, because it kept me busy between the fights in Australia. It's really tough for us because we're not near other countries. All the European countries, they're all so close to each other, so they all get to fight each other regularly, and they have lots of tournaments. Whereas in Australia, even our country itself is so big, to fly to the other side of the country, it still takes us like 4 to 5 hours. So we're sort of stuck like that because we get a little bit left behind in terms of once we've all fought each other, then what do? We go backwards and forwards to Thailand, but we sort of get a bit stuck because we don't have these surrounding countries that help us keep busy,
Yeah, that makes sense. And so in terms of Thailand, you said a lot of women were there. What was the atmosphere at Sinbi like? What was the sort of training like?
The training was obviously just like your typical Thai style training. In the morning, sort of, you do your run and you skip and three or four rounds on pads, a bit of bag work. It wasn't generally any sparring or anything like that. There was a bit of clinching in the mornings, and then obviously during the daytime, just rest or go to the beach, do all those cool things that you can do in Thailand, like get massages and stuff like that. And then at night time, that was the solid session. So, you skip basically just every Thai gym was pretty much the same. Skip, do shadow, 5 rounds on the pads, 5 rounds on the bag, sparring, and then clinching. So I used to clinch for about half an hour or something like that with whoever was there, including the Thai boys. I always used to love jumping in all the Thais because even though they used to throw you around, that's how you got better, and that's what I was there for. In terms of training, the amount of training, if I felt myself, because I was a little bit older than a lot of the other girls, if I felt myself getting tired, a lot of the times, Thais, they keep pushing you, but I was quite honest with them, and I understand my body, and I know what my body needs, and if I need to rest, I'm going to be better the next day, rather than, don't make me run twice a day, because I don't need to run twice a day. I do feel like there was a little bit of overtraining there. I think a lot of people agree now that they do overtrain a little bit, especially with all the new, scientific methods that people have for training and everything now. And that's why I only went there for short stints at a time, because if I went there for a long period of time, I'd probably burn myself out.
As always, if you'd like to follow me, you can do so on Instagram, Matt Lucas Muay Thai. I always respond to messages there. I also have the website, matt-lucas.com, or email me at a.matt.lucas@gmail.com. Thanks to all the people that have supported me so far, sharing the podcast, leaving reviews. If you'd like to leave a review, that would be super helpful. You can do so on the iTunes stores. After years of hard work, studying, and being in the game, I published On Fighting in Thailand, a guide to the sport in the motherland. It's a Muay Thai encyclopedia. It goes over scoring, matchmaking, picking gym, fight styles, gambling, Muay Thai culture, and more. It contains a series of interviews with long-term expat fighters, including Michael Savas, Willie Whipple, Lisa Brealey, Angela Chang, and others. It is a great guide, educates and helps guide careers by helping save fighters from costly mistakes. It is a definitive guide and is available on Amazon as an ebook and in print. So go check it out. On Fighting in Thailand, a guide to the sport in the motherlands. Yeah, most of your trips were about 2 to 3 weeks, correct?
Yeah. So I probably, majority of the times, I'd probably be there for between 10 and 14 days. So I'd go relatively fit. Not peaking fit, because I knew once I got there then they'd ramp it up, but I'd go there relatively fit, and then I'd do 2 sessions, and then 2 sessions, and then one session, and then have a day off, and then 2 sessions, one session, have a day off. So I was like still quite smart with my training over there, rather than just letting myself become like really overtrained and tired by training twice a day every day.
Mm-hmm. And where did you fight? You fought in Phuket at Bangla, or were you moving around the country as well?
So I had a lot of my fights at Bangla, and they used to bring people in from different areas, like from Bangkok and some of the islands and stuff like that. They would bring in a good Thai, and I always had a good Thai to fight too. Like I never went to Thailand and ended up with an opponent that didn't give me a hard fight, and I always knew that when I went to Sydney too, I knew that they knew that I wanted good hard fights, that I didn't want to just come and fight one round. I wanted to come and get a good 5-round fight in. So I fought a couple of girls from different areas that way, and then I also fought a couple of times on the King's birthday and the Queen's birthday as well, which was a really good experience.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Who did you fight on the King's and Queen's birthday? What was that experience like?
The Queen's birthday was I can't remember the promotion, elite fight promotions, I think, from the Queen's birthday in Bangkok. So it was just a big, you know what it's like in Bangkok. They set up like the big ring and everything in just an area, and it's very open, and it's just got that good Thai feel to it. You look out to the crowd, you can just see heaps of people and heaps of Thais standing around, and that was an amazing experience. I fought a girl who was, I think she might have been undefeated in 60 fights. So I was a little bit nervous going into that fight, obviously, because I knew she was from a really good gym. I can't remember the guy's name.
Jockey.
She was from a really good gym, and I was a little bit nervous going into that fight, but I just had a really good fight. Obviously trusted myself and my ability, and came away to win.
And were there a lot of other females fighting in the Muay Thai world, like at that time, both like in Bangkok? Were you aware of a lot of other foreigners besides, you said, Teresa and Natalie, that were sort of fighting regularly?
There were quite a few foreigners at that point. There were, I think Sylvie Von Douglas, she had just started her time in Thailand at about that time, I think. So always was busy, like you go to Thailand, there's a lot of Russian countries and stuff like that there, so it was always busy, and there was never shortage of people to train with and stuff like that when you went there. So not like what it would be like right now.
And then, because you were making these trips back and forth, do you feel like you impacted Australian Muay Thai and sort of life back in Perth by going over, fighting, and then bringing, your knowledge back?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, it was one of those things that I guess inspired people to do a similar thing. It is a little bit easier for us in Western Australia, where I live, with it being only like a 6-hour flight. If you live in Melbourne or Queensland or one of those states on the other side of the country, it does take a little bit longer, so it's about 9 or 10 hours, I think. So it definitely did inspire people to sort of take off for a quick trip and get a fight in between shows here. That's for sure, yeah. But I mean, that kind of stuff hasn't been able to happen in the last year or so. A lot of fighters in Australia, they just haven't been able to get fights. The more experienced girls, they're missing out on fights because they can't travel backwards and forwards to Thailand and to get that training or get a fight in.
And then how often were fights happening for you in Australia?
Darren and I, we promoted shows, which pretty much guaranteed me fights on every show. So we did 3 or 4 fight shows a year. So that would guarantee 3 or 4 fights definitely in Perth. I may have sometimes got one here and there in another state, but towards the end of my career, I was getting like none in other states. And then in between those 3 and 4 fights in Perth, then I would go to Thailand in between those fights. I was probably getting about 7 fights a year, maybe 8.
Yeah.
Yes. I was really trying to keep as busy as what I can because, as I said to you before, I knew that I didn't have a lot of time, and I really wanted to try and make the most out of what I had.
And then later in your career, you signed with Lion Fight for a couple bouts. What was that experience like?
Obviously, everyone wants to sort of get to that international level and fight in America and all that kind of stuff. And And when they contacted me about fighting Tiffany, I'd actually heard an interview from her, and she sort of called me out, and I thought, oh God, this is probably going to happen soon. And literally within a week of me hearing that, they had contacted me and asked me if I wanted to fight Tiffany, and obviously I said yes straight away. And just the whole experience of travelling to America, being so far away, and an Australian actually having the opportunity to actually compete in a place like that was unbelievable, because it just doesn't really happen that often for Australia. It didn't back then. Now it is, but it didn't back then. So obviously I was really grateful for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And you actually fought injured, correct? What happened?
Yeah, it was probably the worst lead up to a fight I've ever had. I don't know whether you know, but I've had neck surgery. And because of so much clinching over the years, and so much hard clinching with a lot of the men and the guys in the gym and in Thailand and stuff like that, I developed some spurs on my neck, and they started to tap the nerve out of my neck, and they were travelling down my arm, and there was pain, constant pain and burning down my arm and down my chest, and I'd lose sort of like feeling in my arm. Sometimes I'd just lose complete control of my arm, or it would just drop down by the side of my body, and I wouldn't be able to pick it up until I'd release something in my neck. So I trained with that injury for a couple of years, but it was really bad when I was training for her. But I really didn't want to pull out. And as I think we left to go to America on the Monday, and even like on the Saturday prior to leaving, I just said to Daz, I don't even know if I can sit on this flight, because I couldn't sit in a chair for longer than 10 minutes without me almost, tearing up and crying just in pain. So I don't know if I can sit on the flight that long. But for some reason on the flight, there was actually no pain. I don't know if it was the pressure or I don't know what it was. But anyway, I ended up getting to America, and obviously just dealing with what I had to deal with when I was there. But in the warm-up prior to actually fighting, Daz was throwing some punches at me, and I was throwing some punches back in the pads, and he just clipped my chin, and my arm just dropped down by the side of my body, and I said, I can't get my arm off, it's not moving. And he looked at me, and I was like, it's not my arm, I can't feel my arm. So he clipped somehow the nerve in the neck, and it had my arm was just hanging down by the side of my body, and I was thinking, I have got to go out and fight in like 10 minutes, and I can't pick my arm up. But then I sort of managed for that sort of came in too, but the lead up for that fight was the worst lead up for a fight I've ever had.
Yeah.
I managed to do it. And when I think back to it, I actually think how much, I guess, mental toughness goes into something like that, because it was just an awful experience. Like, I just didn't enjoy it at all.
And you went on to win the fight. What was the fight itself like?
The fight was good. It was close. Obviously, it was a split decision. On the fight card, on the scorecard, and everything like that. And I think we just had a lot of respect for each other. Like, I knew that she was a really young, hungry, very skillful, very powerful fighter, and she knew that I was sort of the same, but on the end of towards the end of my career. So I was sort of the veteran. She was the new hungry fighter coming up. I wanted to protect what I had, and she wanted to prove what she was going in with. So we both had a lot of respect for each other, and we still do. We still talk very regularly, and she's a good friend of mine, Tiffany. We've actually become really good friends out of that fight, which is, it's beautiful to see in sport when you can become such good friends with somebody after a fight as well.
What was sort of the impact of you winning back home? Like, what did people think when you brought back the, an international belt back to Australia?
When I think back to it, I'm glad that I sort of don't fall into the whole pressure thing, because looking back, it was just sort of when Facebook and that was just kicking off, like, it just started to get really popular, and everybody posted on Facebook. Everything went onto Facebook. Everyone put everything on Facebook. Everything went through Facebook. Facebook was the thing back then, and I just remember seeing every time I sort of clicked onto Facebook, everything was about Tiffany and I fighting, and I was just thinking, oh my God, there's just so many people in Australia just waiting for this fight to happen. And because of the time difference, I think it was 11 o'clock here or something on the Saturday, and I fought her on the Friday night, and I could just remember after the fight getting onto Facebook, and the whole of Australia was behind me, just there was messages and Facebook status updates and pictures, and it was just like unbelievable to see like a whole country was behind me.
And then when you came back to Australia, you fought a few more times. You fought Chomini, correct?
Yeah, I fought Chomini. So it was match fight to me for the line fight world title, and then 4 weeks later I had to come back and fight Chomini and defend my WFC world title. Straight from fighting Tiffany, I went to Aspen for a few days to enjoy the downtime. I couldn't really do too much. I did go skiing, but I was really hesitant to sort of let myself go because I knew that I had to come back and defend my world title. So then I came back and I had Chomini to fight, which was really different because I had 2 really different fights to prepare for within a small time frame. So I had Tiffany, who's really like bouncy, she's very explosive and powerful, she moves around a lot on her feet. And then I had Chomini, who's, very Thai style, she stands her ground, she's very skillful, but she doesn't really bounce around and have that sort of kickboxing explosive style. So I had really two different fighters to try and to train for at sort of the same time, which was it was good. It was difficult, but obviously it was very doable because I was able to come away with a win for both of them. So.
Yeah, for sure. And what was the fight itself like with Chomini?
Chomini was very, very difficult to fight because she has a very similar style to what I have. So in the first round, I lost the first round against Chomini. I went back to the corner and I was like, holy shit, I'm losing this fight so far. I'm fighting someone who is so similar to myself. I don't know what to throw. And then I had to think to myself, I said to Daz, how am I going to beat myself? Like, how do I beat myself? Because that's what I have to do when I go back out there. I've got to pretend that she's me and I've got to try and beat myself because everything she threw was things that I would throw. So I had to sort of almost think ahead to what I would throw to try and counter that. So, I ended up just going for the clinch and really trying to, I guess, overpower her with my strength in the end.
And obviously you did. You had a few more bouts after that. What led you to decide to retire, and what was sort of your later part of your career like?
Obviously I had the fight with Tiffany and the fight with Chomini. The fight with Chomini was originally meant to be with Saucy, who I really, really wanted to fight. Obviously one of the best Thai fighters in the world. Everybody knows Saucy, and we had sort of, I think she had a baby within that time, so she had a little bit of time off, and then she came back, and I was like, yes, she's back, and I finally get to fight her, and I'll bring her over and we can fight for the world title, but then she got injured and pulled out, so I fought Chomini, which was fine, because Chomini is also just as amazing, so, but I do regret, not regret, but I am sort of bummed that I never got to fight Saucy, because to me, she's probably one of the best Thai fighters in the world. And, she might have considered me to be one of the best Western fighters in the world. And for us to come together would have been, I think, really good in the ring just to see a Western fighter and a Thai fighter at that level. But obviously never happened. So I had a couple of more fights. I fought Chomini and then I fought Delara. And then I just felt like I wasn't really getting the challenges that I wanted to get, and I knew that I was heading towards that age where, I'm probably starting to think about having kids now. Are these fights challenging enough for me to keep going? And to me at that time, the answer was no. Even though I was still getting good fights, they just weren't enough. They weren't hard enough for me to go, this is worth giving more time up to not have kids or to not worry about having kids at the moment. So I guess that was the decision that I made at that time, and decided to retire on the 60th fight. And it was a nice even number. If I had won that 60th fight, it would have been 30 straight wins. So it was all sort of like lining up for me. 30 straight wins, 60 fights. I'm 35. I'm kind of I've had some great fights. 6 times world champion. I need to know when to call it, and I feel like this is the time.
So, since you retired, what's happened with Australian Muay Thai, and how has it changed?
Muay Thai for females is really good. It's really strong at the moment. We've got some great fighters that have got great opportunities. You know, we've had things like One and Glory and things like that that have opened up for females, which was never around when I was fighting. So we've had some great things open up like that for the girls. Obviously, the last year or two it's been pretty quiet because of COVID, but it's now starting to ramp up again. You know, there's a Super 4 in Queensland this weekend with 4 of Australia's top female fighters. So that'll be really good. But yeah, it's there. It's a bit quiet at the moment, but I'm sure once sort of this COVID thing sort of settles down a little bit and the shows can start to kick off again, then we'll see a lot more activity in the girls, that's for sure.
Do you think you and Daz will go back to promoting, or you think you'll take a break from that?
It's definitely a hard one because at the moment it's kind of risky. You know, you do a fight show. Like I've seen it happen to a couple of promoters in Perth at the moment. You do a fight show, you organise the whole fight show, and it's just, you know, at the moment I prefer just to hang out for a bit and see how things go. I'm sure that, you know, one of us will do a show again in the future, but right now I think we're just chilling just to see what happens. We've got the gym and there's a lot going on in our lives like that. So we sort of we need to weigh it up a little bit, like the amount of effort that goes into promoting a show. You know, if they've fallen on us in the last minute and, you know, we've given up time with the kids and things like that, then it's, you know, that's not worth it for us.
And how many shows did you guys promote, and what was that experience like?
So we've promoted, I reckon we've promoted maybe about 40 shows. I would have fought on maybe 25 of them, I think. Which was always hard because I did half the work for the show, so I did a lot of like the behind the scenes, organising all like the liquor licenses and just all that kind of stuff that you don't really see. And I still had to be on the fight show and be on the fight card, so a lot of that got a little bit tough at times. But you know, I just had to deal with it. That was my job as a person promoting, and it was also my job as a fighter to be able to hold myself together and do the job that I was set out to do.
And actually, how did you maintain yourself while you were actively fighting? Were you working at the gym? Did you have some other source of income?
So initially, I was like I managed like a health practice with chiropractors and massage therapists and OTs and everything like that. And then I started to do a lot of PTs at the gym, and I started to get a lot of PTs, and it was just far too much for me to manage doing that job and also doing PTs. And then once rental started to grow, then I started to take a sort of admin role on it and started to do a lot more hours at the gym. So I left my job that I'd had for 10 years and started to do obviously more stuff at the gym, more PTs, more classes and all that kind of stuff. So I sort of just transitioned that way to the gym.
And did you start doing more PTs because your career was growing, or how did that develop?
I started to do more PTs because a lot of females obviously looked up to me and took a lot of inspiration from my training and stuff like that. So obviously contacted me about doing some one-on-one sessions, and from there I started to do, you know, I was like doing 25 PTs a week or something like that.
Wow.
It just ended up being towards the end, like as I started to ramp up my training and fight harder opponents, it just got a little bit too much towards the end, so that I had to sort of, you know, taper off that kind of stuff because I found like I was in the gym just far too much. By the time I got to my own training, I was just like, I just didn't want to be there, so I had to make that decision to cut my PTs in half and focus on my training and my fighting and stuff like that. Otherwise, I was just burning myself out.
That makes sense. And now, are you still doing PTs, or how has sort of your post-fight career been?
Post-fight career is, you know, I still struggle with it some days. You know, for being such a, I guess, high-level athlete at the top level and being there for a long time, to then stopping and having two kids very close together in age and also very close to when I finished fighting, has been a little bit tough at times. I love training. It's like an absolute passion of mine. And I've spent so many hours like training and fighting and just dedicating my whole life to this one thing. And then obviously having the kids and having that thing not there anymore, it's difficult at times because I've still got that same mentality with training. Like I was talking to you about CrossFit before. Like I've gone into CrossFit and I did start having that same mentality as what I did with fighting, but I had kids with it and it just wasn't working. It was just too much for me. Mm-hmm. So I really had to find a new balance and, you know, really cut back my training and spend more time with the kids and spend more time doing things, you know, outside of the gym. Mm-hmm. I listened to a really good interview by a CrossFit girl this morning, actually. She just busted her knee. And one of the things that stood out to me that she said, and it also, like, literally brought a tear to my eye because I was like, oh my God, this is like so me. She said, I'm not just an athlete, I'm actually a person, and there's more to me than just like training. And I think that she just nailed that on the head for me because I was like, that's, I guess you identify yourself as that person, and then when it's taken away, you're like, shit, what actually am I? Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. So I've kind of really struggled with that part of post-fighting. Mm-hmm. And I've got this great balance now where I do train like 45 minutes in the day, and I am competing in CrossFit, but I feel like, shit, I'm not giving everything I am. I'm not giving everything that I can to CrossFit, so I'm not getting the results I want. Mm-hmm. And I'm also not willing to put more into training, so I'm really struggling with that at the moment. That's my thing that I'm having some problems, issues with at the moment is I still want to do well, but I'm not willing to put in extra hours.
Yeah.
So, and you see with lots of different athletes, you know, ex-fighters, they turn to alcohol, or ex-basketball players, they might turn to like being addicted to gambling or something like that. They've always got that mentality because they're so focused on achieving goals, and when they're not there, they're like, what am I doing? Like, where am I? What am I doing? I need something, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Something you mentioned before is sort of the beginnings of Facebook and sort of social media. How do you think social media has impacted, you know, the later parts of your career? And then, you know, how has it developed in the sport as well in Australia?
Obviously, with social media and things like that, we're pretty lucky. I mean, it has its good points and it has its shit points as well. I guess with having social media, you get fight results straight away. You can log on, you can watch fights anywhere around the world. You know, we've got access to being able to watch one. We've got access to being able to watch Muay Thai Grand Prix, all that kind of stuff. It's really good like that. And it's really good for fighters being able to maintain their profile, putting their name out there, and, you know, I guess letting people know who they are and that kind of stuff. I think it's really important that fighters stay grounded, though. Even though there are these pros, we need to make sure that the fighters are staying grounded and they're not sort of like, I guess, using Facebook and social media for the wrong reasons.
Absolutely. And sort of winding things down, or just getting a general glimpse, I know you said that COVID has sort of put things on a halt for Australian Muay Thai, but what has the landscape been like in the last few years, especially for women? You mentioned earlier that there are a lot more women fighting and women headlining shows, but how would you sort of summarize the Australian Muay Thai landscape, and where do you think it's going?
Look, to be honest, I've fought a lot of people around the world and I've seen a lot of fights, and I actually think Australian Muay Thai is definitely out there as one of the stronger countries. We've got some, like just in WA itself, we've got some freaking awesome fighters, you know, like Roy Wills, Toby Smith, and we've got over in Queensland, we've got like Charlie Barb, and here we've got George Mann, and our quality of fighters here in Australia is, you know, like second to none. We've got some great fighters, and we're all busy here. We are busy, like our fight shows are busy. I just wish that our fighters had more opportunities overseas. I really feel that where we are located, obviously so far away, that we do struggle getting those opportunities. But we are lucky as well because we do have a lot of good promoters that bring people in. So hopefully we can just keep continuing the way that we are. Everybody knows that Australia's, you know, like a tough country. Our fighters, we never say no, we never back down to a fight. And yeah, see how we go. Once all this COVID stuff starts to, you know, disappear, if it ever does, then hopefully we can get, back on track and start getting some more international fights happening again.
Yeah, hopefully. And then just a final question or two. How do you think your career has impacted the sport, especially Australian Muay Thai? Is that something you've thought about that much?
It's so weird when I read that question, because I was like, oh, has my career actually impacted with it? I think when you're in something, you don't realise what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it takes an outside person for them to say, you've actually impacted the scene. Whereas if I'm in it, I don't realise that it's actually happening. But I guess looking back at it, and if I take a step outside and look in, I guess I have impacted it a lot, and I've inspired girls to get out there and to fight and to go to Thailand on their own and train and get a fight and come back and keep busy. And I guess having the magazine Round 2 International Kickboxer, which was a massive magazine here in Australia, that they really started to promote girls a lot too, and I got a lot of coverage in those magazines, which was good, and I got to sort of share my stories and inspire people that way too. So I guess hearing you say that, I guess I have inspired people.
Yeah, for sure. One of the reasons why I wanted to interview you is I remember when you started fighting in 2000 or, the early 2000s, and you being an international kickboxer, and, you've definitely shaped Australian Muay Thai and definitely women's Muay Thai in the world. So I was like, okay, Caley's definitely someone to interview.
Yeah, it's funny because in the gym we have these big posters of a couple of different things, and two of the posters are the front page of the International Kickboxer, and on the front of the picture and on my face it sort of says Australia's Queen or something like that. And sometimes I'm like, holy shit, that's me, and my kids look at it and there's mummy up there, and I'm like, that's something that I forget about, and it takes for my kids to look at that and go, oh, that's my mummy up there on that poster. It's like, I sometimes forget what I've done, and I have to look at it and go, oh shit, I actually had this amazing career. And sometimes I'll get onto YouTube and just search for my fights, just watching on the fight, and then go, that was actually me. I had a great career, and I fought people all over the world. I didn't back down. I fought whoever I was put in front of me, and I have to sit there sometimes and be proud. Allow myself to be proud of myself.
Just wrapping things up, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot of stuff.
Great. And how can people follow you or, see what's going on in the world of Caley Reece?
I'm pretty slow on social media. I had Facebook for a long time, and I got rid of Facebook about a year ago, which was nice. And so I've only really got Instagram at the moment. So my Instagram name is Caley Reece. I share a lot of training stuff and CrossFit stuff and stuff about the kids and my sausage roll fetish. I'm pretty easy, I think. So if you want to follow me, you can follow me. If not, then you don't have to.
Well, I'll definitely be following along, and thank you again for taking your time and all that you've done for the sport in Australia.
Thanks so much for interviewing me and allowing me to obviously pass my stories on and hopefully inspire someone listening to take the next step in their journey.
So I think that interview was awesome. There's some really interesting points. Caley fighting the same girls multiple times, not being choosy about the fights, just wanting that ring experience. Very, very important. Also, she briefly touched on it, but maybe might be a subject for a future podcast, is what happens when fighters stop fighting. That shift in identity. It's definitely something I felt and have felt before. What happens when you get injured and you can no longer fight? What happens when you retire and you can no longer fight? As Caley pointed out, a lot of people turn to alcoholism, or for basketball players, gambling. So there needs to be sort of a way for people to deal with the fact that their fight careers end. But Caley's career has not ended. She is still in the sport. obviously shifting away from fighting and being more behind the scenes and helping coach people, which I think is really great. She's been a real inspiration for the sport and for women around the world. So I'm very happy to have interviewed her. And this completes the series on Muay Thai in Australia. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you as always for listening. And once again, if you like this show and if you like the content, it would be great if you could share, leave a review on iTunes, and really support the show and what I'm doing here. If you'd like to reach me, you can follow me on Instagram at Lucas Muay Thai or email me at a.matt.lucas@gmail.com. As always, this has been On Fighting in Thailand, the best news and analysis covering the economics and infrastructure of Muay Thai. I'm Matt Lucas, journalist, commentator, and ex-Muay Thai fighter. Make stronger fighters, make stronger people.
This show was edited by Effie Ceruti. You can find me on Instagram at Effie_FC or on Facebook at Effie Ceruti.